From the time I was a little boy, it was instilled in me to have respect for those who came before me. Certainly relatives, my elders, but to a larger extent, those who brought about freedom in the United States of America, the founders of the country, and to revere and to ensure those freedoms continue for me and for future generations of Americans. The First Amendment to the Bill of Rights consists of only 45 words, yet the interpretation, or more misinterpretation, of such a short amendment is wide and far. This is what the First Amendment says. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The words are clear and concise, and simply written, and quite evident of the meaning when you examine the words and implications of the words to life in the United States. Keep watching as you'll hear an angle of the First Amendment that might shock and surprise you when closely examined and weighing out certain arguments that have no merit in adding words or meaning to the First Amendment. This short documentary will examine the amendment, period. However, we should acknowledge the inhumane treatment of indigenous people who inhabited this land prior to the Europeans, or to the enslavement of Africans and the horrific scar that made on the United States, and other forms of discrimination that to this day can be seen from time to time. Many documentaries have been made and can deal with that aspect of the American experience. However, this production will focus solely on the First Amendment. The United States has adapted throughout history to ensure the rights of those previously denied. Over time, at least corrections are made and amendments implemented to reflect injustices of any kind and attempt to correct them. We need to go into a little background to where the founders of the United States were inspired to write the Bill of Rights. Here's a little history lesson. In 1215 AD, Magna Carta was written into law by King John of England. It was a set of laws written down that the people had rights to certain areas of life, and the king couldn't hold complete rule over their lives. This is where the term law of the land originated. All were held to the law. King John held to his law of the land just for a few weeks, and then he quickly stopped it. King John became one of the most ruthless tyrants of that time, and in some eyes, ever in English history. Now, fast forward to where early colonies were set up in the New World. The framework of Magna Carta would soon come to be the law of the land in what would become the United States of America. With more freedoms for the citizenry and something where government would be limited and restricted from infringing. At the time, King George of England was imposing harsh conditions on the colonies, and the people had no redress or representation over his rule. The Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution were three of the main founding documents of the United States, and with the Revolutionary War, a new nation was established. The new nation was about raising the rights and freedoms of the citizens, and restricting those of the government. Rights given to them by our Creator, not government. The First Amendment describes the religious framework as it pertains to religion and the government, and how religious people are free to express their beliefs without any prohibiting their free exercise. And freedom of speech, the press, peaceful assembly, and that the people have a right to approach the government should they feel their freedoms have been wrongfully infringed. With that said, let's look at these words. I believe many people will be surprised by the truths uncovered here and the misnomers of additions which aren't in the First Amendment at all, and the prejudice with some of the misuses and misrepresentations or additions to the words. Again, the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The first part of the amendment is sometimes referred to as the Establishment Clause, because that portion speaks of how the government isn't to establish a religion. The founders of the United States, not wanting to replicate the horror from which many came, established freedom of religion in the New World. To finally not be repressed into submission to government-sanctioned religion. Hence the Establishment Clause. A popular phrase used for generations when it comes to religious freedom in the United States is that there's a wall of separation of church and state. And many are of the opinion that this phrase has somehow been canonized in the founding documents. This phrase has been used by so many and for so long that they believe it has to do with the First Amendment and religious freedom. Let's examine the First Amendment again. Let's see. Where does it say wall? Nowhere. Let's look for separation. That's not there either. Let's look for the word church. Wow, another word that's not in the First Amendment as well. Okay, let's look for state. Let's see. Well, I guess you could say Congress and government could be a synonym of state. So maybe only two words as a synonym of this widely held thought that there's a wall of separation of church and state isn't part of the founding document, the Bill of Rights, in particular the First Amendment, which speaks of religious freedom. Where did this phrase originate? It might surprise you, but it came from a personal letter, not a founding document, written from Thomas Jefferson to a church in Connecticut, the Danbury Baptist Church, in which Jefferson made mention of a wall of separation of church and state. A personal letter from one of the founders to a church can't seriously be considered to be part of our founding documents. It was a personal letter from a founding father to a church. That's all. Again, let's read the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Not one word about a wall of separation of church and state. Not one. As this phrase has been passed down from one generation to another, it could be seen as discriminatory to Christians, the ones who worship in a church. Not an Islamic mosque, or a temple for Jews, or a Buddhist temple, or any number of hundreds of forms of religious expression. It's specifically speaking of church and state. It narrows it down to only Christians. It's doubtful that Thomas Jefferson meant it as anti-Christian. After all, he was sending his personal letter to a church where Christians worship. Perhaps he wanted to assure them that the government wasn't to penetrate the supposed wall of separation and impose a government religion, as they'd have to adapt to, as was the case in Europe. However, over time, sentiment of this letter and phrase has developed into prejudiced thoughts against Christians and their involvement in government affairs, or that their ideas should be kept in their church and not permeated through the supposed wall of separation into government. This is the brilliance of the founders of the United States, because in the First Amendment it doesn't refer to any specific group, such as a Christian church. It simply speaks of religion. Any religion. Freedom to worship as you wish, or not worship at all if that's your desire or belief. It's freedom, pure and simple. Religious freedom, religious expression. However, if Thomas Jefferson's letter insinuated that the wall meant church and Christians aren't to be involved in government or attempt to influence the affairs of the nation, I don't believe that's really the case. Why then were many of the first public schools throughout the country were started and held in churches? If Jefferson's sentiments were really the case, then why then, in many cases, was the first reader the Holy Bible? Why are there biblical references alluded to on and in many of U.S. government buildings? And in the founding documents, if there really was a wall of separation of church and state, it's because that wasn't their intent. These are interesting questions to ponder. One other observation is that the freedom of religion, speech, press, and peaceful assembly is the First Amendment. It must have been very important for them. Why then wasn't it the fifth or sixth down the line? It was the first for a reason. Top priority, number one. It makes you wonder about how government is infringing on our freedom of religion today, and what can be said, or how houses of worship wish to conduct their business. How many people have been fined or lost their jobs to their freedom of speech by not complying with a governmental mandate or law stating what you can or can't say? How many houses of worship have been closed down due to their not complying with social pressure of certain groups or the government itself by not holding beliefs that might conflict with their religious beliefs? Where's their freedom? It makes you wonder. It makes me wonder why more people aren't approaching the government for redress of grievances, as mentioned, that we have the right to in the First Amendment. The Declaration of Independence states, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, rights given to us by God, our Creator, given by God, not government. Government didn't give it, so it can't take it away. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Freedom. Freedom to worship or not as we wish, to speak, write, or peacefully assemble, and to approach the government if we need to concerning infringement of our freedoms. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances." My late father, Pastor Charles Jones, a Baptist minister, used to tell me as I was growing up about freedoms enjoyed in the United States. He'd say, "Son, it's either freedom for all, or it's not freedom at all."